The ink hadn't even dried on the divorce decree when Harrison Beauchamp started laughing. He stood in the center of the Manhattan Superior Court, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke Brioni suit, convinced he had just pulled off the heist of the century. He was dumping his boring, simple wife, Charlotte, leaving her with a rusty sedan and a rented apartment while he kept the keys to the billion-dollar aerospace giant Beauchamp Dynamics. Or so he thought. He didn't know that the woman sitting quietly across from him wasn't trembling with grief. She was checking her watch. Harrison thought he was the king casting out a peasant. He had no idea he had just handed the queen his crown. The air in courtroom 302 smelled of stale coffee and expensive lies. Outside, the New York rain battered against the heavy glass of the Center Street courthouse, but inside the atmosphere was arid and hostile. Harrison Beauchamp sat with his legs sprawled, occupying as much space as physically possible. He tapped his fountain pen, a Mont Blanc limited edition, against the mahogany table. A rhythmic click, click, click that echoed like a ticking bomb. Beside him sat Gavin Spector, a divorce attorney so notorious in the Hamptons that he was colloquially known as the Butcher. Across the aisle sat Charlotte. She wore a grey wool cardigan that had seen better days and no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, unassuming bun. She looked small, defeated. To the casual observer, she was the quintessential discarded wife, the woman who had supported her husband while he climbed the ladder only to be shoved off the moment he reached the roof. "Let's wrap this up, shall we?" Gavin Spector sneered, sliding a thick stack of documents across the table. "My client has a tea time at Liberty National at 3. He's being generous, Charlotte. The settlement includes the Honda, the apartment in Queens, paid up for 6 months, and a lump sum of $50,000. In exchange, you waive all rights to Beauchamp Dynamics, the Tribeca penthouse, the Aspen Lodge, and any future earnings." Harrison smirked, not even looking at her. He was busy texting on his phone. Charlotte knew exactly who he was texting. Vanessa, the 24-year-old PR intern who had been rebranding Harrison's personal life for the last 8 months. "The judge is ready to sign off," Gavin continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Harrison is doing you a favor. Without a prenup, we could have dragged this out for years, drained your savings, and left you with debt. Sign the papers, Charlotte. Go find a nice librarian job. Disappear." Charlotte looked down at the papers. The text blurred slightly, not from tears, but from the sheer audacity of the clauses. Clause 44B. The plaintiff. Charlotte acknowledges she has no knowledge of nor contribution to the intellectual property of Beauchamp Dynamics. It was insulting. It was cruel. Is there a problem? Harrison finally looked up. His eyes cold and blue, devoid of the warmth she remembered from 10 years ago when they were both eating instant noodles in a basement in Brooklyn. "Just sign it, Char. Don't make a scene. You know you're not built for a fight. You're soft." "Soft," Charlotte repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Exactly. Soft. You like baking. You like gardening. You don't like litigation. Sign it, take the 50 grand and buy yourself some, I don't know, yarn." Harrison chuckled, and Gavin joined in a shark-like grin spreading across his face. Charlotte picked up the pen. Her hand didn't shake. The judge, the Honorable Silas Weatherby, looked over his spectacles. "Mrs. Beauchamp, do you understand the document you are signing? This is a complete severance of assets. You are walking away from a multi-billion-dollar marital estate." "I understand, Your Honor," Charlotte said, her voice steady. "And you are satisfied with the $50,000. Judge Weatherby asked, a frown of disbelief creasing his forehead. Even he seemed disgusted by Harrison's greed. I am satisfied that this document ends my marriage to Mr. Beauchamp, Charlotte said carefully, and that it legally separates our financial identities completely, effective immediately. Great, she gets it, Harrison snapped. Sign. Charlotte pressed the pen to the paper. The scratch of the nib was the only sound in the room. Charlotte A. Kensington. She didn't use his last name. She used hers. Done, she said, sliding the papers back. Harrison snatched them up as if they were made of gold. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. Finally. God, that was exhausting. He turned to Gavin. Send the wire to her account. Let's get out of here. Vanessa is waiting at Le Bernardin. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. He marched out of the courtroom, the heavy doors swinging shut behind him, with a final booming thud. Charlotte remained seated. Mrs. Kensington, the judge asked gently. You are free to go. Charlotte slowly reached into her oversized, worn-out tote bag. She pulled out a sleek black iPad and a phone that was definitely not the cracked model she had been using in front of Harrison. She tapped the screen, her posture shifting instantly. The slump in her shoulders vanished, her chin lifted. The soft housewife was gone, replaced by something entirely different. Thank you, Your Honor, she said, her tone crisp and authoritative. I just needed to wait until the time stamp on the divorce decree was official. She dialed a number on her phone. It's done. He signed the waiver of interest in my external assets to protect his own company. Yes, trigger the clause, initiate the merger, and tell the board of directors at Beauchamp Dynamics I'll be leading the meeting tomorrow morning. She stood up, smoothing her skirt. I'm sorry. Judge Weatherby stammered, baffled. Did you say? You're leading the meeting? Charlotte turned back, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Harrison thought he was protecting his company from me, Your Honor. He didn't realize that his company has been insolvent for 3 years. The only reason it's still running is because it's being funded by a private equity firm called Helios Capital. And, Charlotte slung her bag over her shoulder. I am Helios Capital. To understand the magnitude of the trap Charlotte had just sprung, one had to look back 3 years. Harrison hadn't always been a monster. When they met, he was a brilliant but disorganized engineer, and she was a quiet math prodigy working as an actuary. They built Beauchamp Dynamics together. He was the face, the charisma, the salesman. She was the backbone. She handled the books, the strategy, the logistics. But she stayed in the shadows, preferring anonymity. Then came the fame, the cover of Forbes, the invitations to Davos. Harrison began to believe his own hype. He started listening to the sycophants who told him he was a god, and that his wife was just dead weight, dragging down his image. 3 years ago, Beauchamp Dynamics hit a crisis. Harrison had bet the entire company on a new propulsion engine that failed safety tests. The stock plummeted. The banks came calling. Bankruptcy was days away. Harrison had come home that night, drunk and weeping. It's over, Shah. I've lost it all. Charlotte had held him, stroking his hair. It will be okay, Harry. We'll fix it. There is no we, he had shouted, pushing her away. You don't understand business. You just cook dinner and pay the electric bill. I need a miracle, not a hug. That night broke something in Charlotte. But she didn't leave. Instead, she went to work. Using her inheritance money, Harrison knew nothing about, because he never asked about her family. The Kensingtons, an old money banking dynasty from Connecticut, she set up a shell company, Helios Capital. Through a series of complex intermediaries, Helios Capital bought the toxic debt of Beauchamp Dynamics. They infused cash, saved the company, and took a controlling interest as collateral. Harrison never knew. He was too busy celebrating his miraculous recovery. He told everyone that he had secured a mystery investor through his sheer genius. He never looked into who owned Helios. He just cashed the checks. But the betrayal didn't stop at his arrogance. 6 months ago, Charlotte had come home early from a charity gala to find a diamond earring on her vanity. It wasn't hers. She hired a private investigator the next day. The photos came back within a week. Harrison and Vanessa DuPont, romantic dinners, trips to Cabo, texts mocking Charlotte's fashion sense, her cooking, her quiet nature. She's like a piece of old furniture, Harrison had written in a text the PI intercepted. Useful but embarrassing to show to guests. I'm divorcing her as soon as the stock hits $200. Charlotte had sat in her home office, staring at the photos. She didn't cry. She calculated. If she divorced him, then he would fight. He would try to claim half of her inheritance if he found out about it. He would drag her name through the mud. No. She needed him to force the divorce. She needed him to be so confident, so arrogant, that he would sign anything to get rid of her. She began to play the part. She stopped dressing up. She acted confused when he talked about business. She let him think she was weak. She let him think he was winning. And now here they were. The morning after the court hearing, Harrison Beauchamp woke up in the master suite of the Plaza Athénée. He wasn't at the Queen's apartment he had shared with Charlotte for the last decade, nor was he at the Tribeca penthouse he was currently having, that deep cleaned to remove any trace of his ex-wife's existence. He stretched his arm, hitting the warm, naked skin of Vanessa DuPont. She stirred, mumbling something about room service. Harrison climbed out of bed and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over Central Park. He felt lighter. Specifically, he felt went to a 20 pounds lighter, the exact weight of Charlotte. For years he had convinced himself she was an anchor dragging him down into mediocrity with her coupons, her casseroles, and her incessant questions about budgeting. Now he was free and rich. The stock for Beauchamp Dynamics had rallied overnight on rumors of a leadership restructuring. He assumed the market was reacting to the news of his divorce. Even Wall Street knew he needed to shed the dead weight. "Babe," Vanessa whined from the bed, checking her phone. "Why is my company credit card declined? I tried to order the beluga caviar for breakfast." Harrison frowned, grabbing his silk robe. "Probably just a glitch. The finance department is likely resetting the accounts now that the divorce is final. I told them to sever all ties to Charlotte's authorized user accounts. They probably just froze everything by mistake. I'll fire the comptroller when I get in." He dressed in his best suit, a charcoal Tom Ford three-piece. Today was the quarterly board meeting. He planned to announce his new vision, a pivot into luxury space tourism. It was flashy, expensive, and completely impractical, but it would get him on the cover of GQ. He checked his phone. 17 missed calls from his personal assistant, Gregory. "Needy," Harrison muttered, ignoring them. He wanted to make an entrance. At 8:45 a.m., Harrison's town car pulled up to the gleaming glass spire of the Beauchamp Tower in Midtown. He stepped out, expecting the usual flurry of paparazzi. There was no one, just a few pigeons pecking at a discarded pretzel. He breezed through the revolving doors. The lobby was strangely quiet. Usually the reception staff would wave or jump to attention. Today, the young woman at the desk, a new hire named Jessica, didn't even look up. She was furiously typing, her face pale. "Good morning, Jessica," Harrison boomed, flashing his $1 million smile. She looked up, startled. Her eyes widened in what looked like panic. Mr. Beauchamp, you're here." "Of course I'm here. It's a board meeting. Is the coffee ready in the conference room?" I don't know, sir. I was told that—" She trailed off, her phone ringing. She answered it immediately, turning her back to him. "Rude," Harrison huffed. He walked to the private executive elevator and pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. Access denied. A red light flashed. He frowned and pressed it again. Harder. Access denied. Contact security. "Piece of junk," he muttered. He looked around. No security guards were in sight. Impatient, he used the guest pass he kept in his wallet, for emergencies, a master keycard. He swiped it. The doors slid open. As the elevator ascended to the 40th floor, Harrison checked his reflection in the mirrored walls. He fixed his tie. He rehearsed his opening line. "Gentlemen, the anchor is cut. The ship is ready to fly." The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the executive floor. But something was wrong. The usual buzz of the floor, the phones ringing, the junior analysts running around with binders, was gone. The open-plan office was populated, but everyone was standing still. They were huddled in clusters, whispering. As Harrison stepped out, the whispering stopped. 50 heads turned to look at him. They didn't look at him with reverence. They looked at him with something resembling pity and fear. "Get back to work," Harrison barked, clapping his hands. "What is this, a social club?" Nobody moved. Gregory, his assistant, came running out of his office. The man looked like he was about to vomit. He was sweating profusely. "Mr. Beauchamp, I tried to call you. You shouldn't be here." "What are you talking about, Gregory? I'm the CEO. I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. "Sir, please," Gregory hissed, grabbing Harrison's elbow and trying to steer him back toward the elevator. "You don't understand. The board meeting, it started an hour ago, and she is in there." Harrison stopped dead. "Who is in there?" Gregory's lip quivered. "The new majority shareholder." Harrison laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement. "Impossible. I own 51% of the voting stock. There is no majority shareholder but me." "Sir, the debt covenants," Gregory whispered, his eyes darting toward the double oak doors of the boardroom. "The Helios deal. You signed the conversion clauses 3 years ago. If the stock dipped below a certain threshold, which it did yesterday when the divorce news leaked, the debt converted to equity. Helios Capital owns 65% of the company as of midnight." Harrison felt a cold spike of adrenaline in his gut. Helios is a silent partner. They're just money. Who the hell is representing them?" Gregory didn't answer. He just looked at the boardroom doors. Harrison shoved Gregory aside. "I'm going to straighten this out. Some lawyer thinks they can hijack my company. Watch me destroy them." He marched down the hallway, his footsteps heavy on the plush carpet. He reached the double doors and threw them open with both hands. "All right," Harrison shouted, striding into the room. "Who do you think you are?" The boardroom was freezing. That was the first thing Harrison noticed. The air conditioning was cranked down to Arctic levels. The long oval table was occupied by the 12 members of the board of directors. Usually they sat relaxed, sipping sparkling water. Today they sat rigid backs, straight hands folded on the table like naughty school children. At the head of the table, Harrison's seat, sat a figure. The chair was turned away from the door, facing the window that overlooked the Manhattan skyline. All Harrison could see was the back of a high executive chair and a hand resting on the armrest. A hand with manicured nails, painted a deep blood red. "I asked a question," Harrison demanded, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Who is sitting in my chair?" The chair slowly swiveled around. Harrison's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His brain tried to process the image, but it jammed like a computer trying to run a program that didn't exist. It was Charlotte. But it wasn't the Charlotte he had divorced yesterday. Gone was the messy bun. Her hair was a sleek curtain of liquid gold, cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that screamed power. Gone was the grey wool cardigan. She wore a tailored white suit that cost more than Harrison's car, a structure of sharp shoulders and clean lines that made her look like a modern-day Joan of Arc ready for war. And her face. The softness was gone. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Hello, Harrison," she said. Her voice was smooth, low, and commanded the room instantly. "You're late." "Charlotte," Harrison choked out. He looked at the other board members. "Is this a joke? Why is my ex-wife sitting here?" "Security." "Security answers to me now," Charlotte said calmly. She tapped a finger on a thick leather binder in front of her. "Sit down, Harrison. We have business to discuss." "I'm not sitting down." "You get out of my chair. You signed the papers. You have no rights here." Harrison lunged forward, slamming his hands on the table. "Actually," a dry voice spoke up from the corner. Harrison whipped his head around. Sitting in the corner taking notes was not Gavin Spector, his shark lawyer. It was a man Harrison recognized from the news, Nathaniel Thorne, the most expensive corporate litigator in New York, known for dismantling monopolies for sport. "Mr. Beauchamp," Nathaniel said, adjusting his glasses. "You are correct that Ms. Kensington signed away her rights to marital assets. However, Helios Capital is not a marital asset. It is a separate entity funded by the Kensington Trust, which predates your marriage. And as of 12:01 a.m. this morning, Helios Capital exercised its right to convert its debt holdings in Beauchamp Dynamics into Class A voting shares." Harrison stared at him, then back at Charlotte. You're Helios. I am the managing director and sole beneficiary of Helios Capital." Charlotte said, her voice ice-cold. "I bought your debt 3 years ago, Harrison. When you were crying on the floor because you bankrupted the company with that failed thruster engine, I saved you. I bailed you out." "You..." Harrison's face turned purple. "You tricked me. I protected my investment," she corrected. "I let you play CEO because it kept the stock stable while I restructured the back end. But you became a liability. Your spending, your erratic behavior, your personnel choices." She glanced at the screen at the far end of the room. On the screen was a photo of Vanessa DuPont. "We've been auditing the company accounts," Charlotte said. "It seems you've been running personal expenses through the marketing budget, the penthouse in Cabo, the diamond earrings, the consulting fees paid to Ms. DuPont, who I believe is a college dropout with 0 marketing experience," the board members murmured. Frederick, the oldest member of the board, shook his head in disgust. "Embezzlement, Harrison. Plain and simple." "It's not embezzlement," Harrison sputtered. "It's executive perks. It's theft," Charlotte said, "and it gives us cause." "Cause for what?" "To terminate your contract with cause, effective immediately." The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison blinked. "You can't fire me. I am Beauchamp Dynamics. My name is on the building." "Actually," Charlotte said, opening the leather binder, "we're rebranding next week. The removal of the signage is already scheduled." She slid a single piece of paper down the long mahogany table. It stopped perfectly in front of Harrison. "This is your termination notice," she said. "Since it is for cause, specifically misappropriation of company funds and breach of fiduciary duty, you are not entitled to a severance package. Furthermore, per the morality clause in your contract, your stock options are voided." Harrison looked at the paper. The words swam before his eyes. Termination. Immediate. Forfeiture. "No," he whispered. "No, this is insane. I'll sue. I'll drag you to court for the next 20 years. "With what money?" Charlotte asked softly. "You have $50,000, Harrison. That's what you gave me yesterday, remember? That's what you insisted was fair. And since you signed the waiver acknowledging full separation of assets, you can't touch my money to pay for your lawyers." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "You wanted a divorce, Harrison. You wanted to be free of the boring wife who held you back. Well, congratulations. You're free." Harrison looked around the room. He looked at Frederick, at the other board members, men and women he had golfed with, dined with, laughed with. They all looked away. They knew where the power lay now. "Frederick," Harrison pleaded, "you can't let her do this." Frederick cleared his throat. "The numbers don't lie, Harrison. The company is technically insolvent without the Helios injection. Charlotte, Ms. Kensington, is the only reason we aren't all in federal prison for trading while insolvent. She's the boss." Harrison felt the room spinning. He slumped into the nearest chair, a cheap guest chair, not the executive leather he was used to. "Why?" he croaked, looking at Charlotte. "Why didn't you just tell me we could have run it together?" Charlotte's expression didn't change, but her eyes darkened. "Because you didn't want a partner, Harrison. You wanted a fan. And when I stopped clapping, you replaced me." She stood up. The movement was graceful and final. "Get him out of here." The humiliation inside the boardroom was private. What happened next was public. Two large security guards men, Harrison didn't recognize clearly, new hires brought in by Charlotte, stepped forward. "Mr. Beauchamp," one said, his voice flat. "Please hand over your badge, your phone, and your laptop." "My phone." Harrison clutched his pocket. "That's my personal phone. The bill is paid by the corporation," Charlotte noted, not even looking up from her papers. "It's company property. Hand it over. We need to preserve the evidence of the texts regarding the unauthorized transfers to Ms. DuPont." Shaking with rage, Harrison slammed his phone onto the table. He threw his badge down. "Escort him out," Charlotte ordered, "and make sure he doesn't stop at his office. Everything in there is now evidence in the pending forensic audit." Harrison was marched out of the boardroom. The employees on the executive floor were no longer pretending to work. They were standing watching. Some were recording with their phones. The walk to the elevator felt like a mile. Harrison kept his head high, trying to maintain some shred of dignity, but his face was burning. When the elevator doors opened in the lobby, the scene had changed. The press had arrived. Someone had tipped them off. Likely Charlotte's team. A sea of cameras and microphones awaited him outside the revolving doors. As the security guards pushed him out onto the sidewalk of 6th Avenue, the questions exploded like flashbangs. "Mr. Beauchamp, is it true you've been fired for embezzlement? Harrison is Vanessa DuPont, being investigated for fraud. Mr. Beauchamp, comment on Charlotte Kensington taking over as CEO. Is it true you're bankrupt?" Harrison tried to push through the crowd, shielding his eyes from the flashes. "No comment. Get out of my face." He reached for the door handle of his town car, which was parked at the curb. He yanked it open. "I'm sorry, sir," the driver, his long-time chauffeur, Eddie, said. The doors were locked. Eddie rolled down the window just an inch. I've been ordered to return the vehicle to the company garage. You're not authorized for transport. Eddie, it's me. Open the damn door, Harrison screamed, banging on the glass. Sorry, Mr. Beauchamp. I have a pension to think about. Ms. Kensington is very strict about unauthorized use of assets. Eddie rolled the window up and drove away, leaving Harrison standing on the curb in a cloud of exhaust fumes. The paparazzi went wild. The billionaire left on the curb. It was the money shot. Harrison stood there stranded. He reached into his pocket for his phone to call an Uber, only to realize he didn't have his phone. He had surrendered it upstairs. He patted his other pockets. Wallet. He had his wallet. He turned to run to get away from the cameras. He sprinted down the block, ducking into a Starbucks just to escape the flashing lights. Breathing heavily, he walked up to the counter. The barista stared at him. Harrison Beauchamp in a three-piece suit, sweating and wild-eyed. Coffee, Harrison gasped. Black. That'll be $3.50, the barista said. Harrison pulled out his black Amex, the card that had no limit, the card made of titanium. He swiped it. Beep. Declined. He swiped it again. Beep. Declined. Try this one, he said, pulling out a Visa. Declined. Sir, it says, card reported stolen. The barista said awkwardly. Harrison froze. Charlotte. She had cancelled the joint cards, but the personal ones. The bank must have frozen everything pending the fraud investigation she mentioned. He looked in his wallet. He had no cash. He never carried cash. Rich people didn't need cash. Harrison looked at the line of people behind him. They were staring. Someone whispered, Hey, isn't that the guy from the news? The one who cheated on his wife? Harrison turned and ran out of the shop. He had no car, no phone, no access to money. And he was 50 blocks from the apartment Charlotte had been living in, which was technically the only place he had keys to, if she hadn't changed the locks yet. He began to walk. It started to rain. Harrison Beauchamp, former titan of industry, walked 40 blocks in a torrential downpour to Hudson Yards. His $5,000 suit was ruined, plastered to his skin. His Italian leather shoes squelched with every step. People on the street steered clear of him, this muttering, soaking wet man with the wild look in his eyes. He headed not for his penthouse, which was currently a crime scene, being tossed by forensic accountants, but to the gleaming glass tower, where Vanessa lived in an apartment he paid for naturally. He needed a phone. He needed dry clothes. He needed a stiff drink, and someone to tell him that Charlotte was crazy, that this was all a misunderstanding, and that he was still the king. He managed to slip past the doorman by tailgating a delivery driver. He rode the elevator to the 55th floor, shivering uncontrollably. He banged on Vanessa's door. It took a long time for her to open it. When she did, she wasn't wearing the silk lingerie he usually found her in. She was dressed in jeans and a sweater, surrounded by half-packed Louis Vuitton suitcases. Harrison. She looked at him like he was a drowned rat that had crawled out of the sewer. Jesus, look at you. You're soaking my floor. Let me in, Ness. It's been a hell of a morning. He pushed past her into the apartment. It smelled of expensive candles and panic. I need your phone. Mine was seized. Charlotte is pulling some kind of insane, hostile takeover stunt. She froze the accounts temporarily. Vanessa didn't move to get her phone. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed over her chest. It's not temporary, is it, Harrison? Her voice was shrill, stripped of the baby doll coo she usually used with him. What are you talking about? Of course it is. I'll have this fixed by Monday. I just need to call Gavin. I saw the news. She cut him off, holding up her iPhone. The screen showed a photo of him being rejected by his own limo driver, his hair plastered to his forehead. The headline read, "The Beauchamp bust CEO fired for fraud as ex-wife takes the reins." "They're saying you embezzled millions to pay for all this." She waved a hand around the apartment. "They're saying you're broke. Worse than broke, you're facing indictment." Harrison felt a wave of nausea. "Ness, baby, listen to me. It's complicated corporate maneuvering. Charlotte is vindictive. I have money buried elsewhere. We'll go to Cabo. We'll ride this out." "With what?" she snapped. "My card got declined at Sephora an hour ago. My card, Harrison. The one you said had an unlimited limit. Do you know how embarrassing that was?" Harrison stared at her. He was dripping water onto her Persian rug. His life was collapsing. He was facing prison time, and she was worried about getting declined at a makeup store. "Vanessa, I need help. I need a place to stay tonight. The penthouse is locked down." She laughed. It was a cruel, ugly sound. "Here, are you kidding me? The landlord was just here. Apparently the lease is in the company name. Charlotte's company name now. I have 48 hours to vacate before they change the locks. I'm packing." "Where are you going?" "My sister's in Jersey, until I figure out my next move." She looked him up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "And my next move definitely doesn't involve a broke felon." "But I thought you loved me. You said Charlotte was dragging me down, that we were soulmates." "I loved the lifestyle, Harrison. I loved the private jets and the black cards. I didn't sign up for this." She gestured at his soggy, pathetic form. "You're nobody now. Actually, you're worse than nobody. You're a liability. If they're investigating you for fraud, they might come after me for receiving stolen goods or whatever. You need to leave." "Vanessa." "Get out!" she screamed, grabbing one of the wet shoulders of his jacket and shoving him toward the door. "Get out before I call the cops and tell them an intruder is harassing me." She slammed the heavy door in his face. He heard the deadbolt slide home. Harrison leaned his forehead against the wood. He was colder now than he had been outside. He realized with a sickening clarity that Charlotte hadn't just taken his company. She had stripped away the illusion of his entire life. The respect, the fear, the love, none of it had been real. It had all been bought with money that wasn't even really his. He turned away from the door and walked back toward the elevator, trailing water and dignity with every step. He had nowhere to go but down. The faucet in the kitchen was dripping. Drip. Pause. Drip. To Harrison Beauchamp, a man who had spent the last 5 years acclimated to the silent, pressurized hum of HVAC systems in penthouse suites and the sound-proofed cabins of Gulfstream jets, the noise was maddening. It was a rhythmic, watery hammer striking the center of his forehead. He lay on the beige microfiber sofa, a relic from a life he thought he had incinerated years ago, staring at a water stain on the ceiling that looked suspiciously like a map of Venezuela. The apartment unit 3B of the crumbling brick walk-up in Astoria, Queens, smelled exactly as he remembered, a cocktail of boiled cabbage from the neighbor's unit, lemon-scented floor wax, and the damp metallic tang of old copper pipes. It had been 72 hours since Vanessa had shoved him out of the Hudson Yards apartment. 72 hours since his credit cards had turned into useless rectangles of plastic. 72 hours since he had become the most infamous pariah in New York City. Harrison hadn't eaten a real meal in 2 days. His stomach churned with a mixture of hunger and bile. He had scavenged a box of stale saltine crackers from the back of the pantry crackers that might have been there since 2015 and washed them down with lukewarm tap water. He didn't dare go outside. The paparazzi were gone. Now, having realized he wasn't at the Ritz or the Hamptons, but he was terrified of being recognized by a regular person. The shame was a physical weight pressing him into the lumpy cushions. He closed his eyes, trying to summon the feeling of his bespoke Brioni suit, the weight of his Patek Philippe watch. But all he could feel was the scratchy cotton of the stained T-shirt he had found in a vacuum-sealed bag in the closet, and the phantom sensation of handcuffs. The silence of the apartment was suddenly shattered by 3 sharp raps on the door. Harrison froze. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. The feds. It had to be. They had frozen the assets. Now they were coming for the body. He considered not answering, playing dead. But if they had a warrant, they would just kick the door down. He swung his legs off the couch, his joints stiff. He ran a hand through his greasy, unkempt hair and walked to the door. He took a breath, trying to summon the ghost of his CEO voice, the baritone that used to command boardrooms. "Who is it?" he called out, his voice cracking humiliatingly. "Open the door, Harrison." The voice wasn't deep and gravelly like an FBI agent's. It was cool, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. Harrison unlocked the deadbolt and the chain. He pulled the door open. Charlotte stood in the hallway. The contrast was violent. The hallway was dim, illuminated by a flickering fluorescent tube that buzzed like a dying insect. The walls were painted a peeling institutional yellow. And there, standing on the cracked linoleum, was an avatar of pure, unadulterated wealth. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that Harrison recognized as a Loro Piana, cinched at the waist to highlight a figure he had ignored for years. Underneath, he glimpsed a structured navy dress. She wore oversized tortoiseshell sunglasses, which she slowly removed as she looked at him. Her eyes didn't hold anger. They didn't hold pity. They held the clinical, detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. "May I come in?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. Harrison stepped back, the fight draining out of him. "It's your apartment, technically." "Technically," she corrected as she stepped over the threshold. "It's yours, as of this morning." She walked into the small living room. The click of her Louboutin heels on the cheap laminate flooring sounded like gunshots. She looked around, her gaze lingering on the faded curtains, the scratching post for a cat that had died 4 years ago, the stack of old National Geographic magazines collecting dust in the corner. "It's incredible," she murmured, running a gloved finger along the top of the television set, a bulky plasma screen from the mid-2000s. "It's like a time capsule, a museum of mediocrity." "Why are you here, Charlotte?" Harrison croaked. He stayed near the door, feeling unsafe in the presence of this new version of his wife. "To spike the football. To tell me I'm a loser, I know. I get it. You won." Charlotte turned to face him. She placed her Hermes Birkin bag on the wobbly dining table, taking care not to let it touch a sticky spot. "I didn't come to gloat, Harrison. Gloating is for people who are insecure about their victory. I'm quite secure." She unbuttoned her coat and sat on the edge of the armchair, the one he used to sit in to watch football on Sundays, while she cooked in the kitchenette. "I came to bring you the closing documents, and to explain exactly why your life is over." Harrison bristled. A spark of his old arrogance flared up, desperate for oxygen. "My life isn't over. I'm Harrison Beauchamp. I founded $1 billion company. You think a little scandal is going to bury me? This is America. Charlotte, everyone loves a comeback story. I'll write a book. I'll go on Joe Rogan. I'll spin this as a hostile takeover by a bitter ex-wife." "You could do that?" Charlotte nodded, as if considering a valid strategy. Except for the federal indictment. Harrison went cold. There is no indictment. That was just rumors. It was rumors on Monday, Charlotte said calmly. It became a sealed indictment on Tuesday, and as of this morning when I handed over the forensic audit of the marketing department to the Southern District of New York, it became an active warrant. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick document bound with a heavy clip. She tossed it onto the coffee table. It landed with a heavy thud. "What is that?" Harrison whispered. "That is the paper trail, Harrison. Every single transaction. You were lazy. Did you really think you could funnel $3 million into a shell company registered to Vanessa's mother in Nevis and hide it from me? From me." Harrison stared at the document. I was going to pay it back. Once the engine contract went through. The engine contract that didn't exist. Charlotte raised an eyebrow. Yes, I know about that too. You falsified the pre-orders to pump the stock price so you could trigger your performance bonus. That's securities fraud, Harrison. That's 5 to 10 years minimum. Harrison's knees gave out. He sat heavily on the sofa, putting his head in his hands. The reality was setting in like concrete hardening around his feet. "Why?" he mumbled into his palms. "Why did you let me go this far? If you knew, if you owned the debt, why didn't you stop me 6 months ago?" "Because you hadn't signed the divorce papers yet," Charlotte said. Her voice was so devoid of emotion that it chilled him more than if she had screamed. He looked up. "You let me commit crimes. You let me dig this hole, just to get a better divorce settlement." "I let you be yourself, Harrison," she corrected. "I didn't force you to embezzle. I didn't force you to cheat. I didn't force you to treat the staff like cattle. I simply removed the guardrails. I stopped fixing your messes. I stopped correcting your spreadsheets late at night. I stopped talking you out of your manic, ego-driven ideas. I just sat back and watched you become who you really are." She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the fire escape. "Do you remember when we moved in here?" she asked her back to him. "It was 2013. We had nothing. You were working at that engineering firm, and I was tutoring math. We ate ramen 5 nights a week. But we were happy. Or at least I was." "I was happy," Harrison said, his voice trembling. He felt a sudden, desperate wave of nostalgia. "We were a team, Shah. We built this together. Doesn't that count for anything? Can't you just call off the dogs? You have the company. You have the money. Just let me walk away. I'll go to Bali. I'll disappear." Charlotte turned around. The sunlight from this window caught the diamond studs in her ears. Studs he hadn't bought her. "You can't go to Bali, Harrison. They took your passport." Harrison gaped. "How do you know?" "Because I have it." She reached into her bag again and pulled out his dark blue passport. She held it up between 2 fingers. "The authorities asked me to surrender any travel documents found in your executive office. I obliged." She dropped the passport onto the table next to the audit. "You're a monster," Harrison whispered. "You're actually enjoying this." "I'm not enjoying it," she said, her expression hardening. "I'm executing a transaction. That's what you taught me, isn't it? Business is war, you used to say. Emotions are for losers." "Well, I'm just applying your philosophy." She walked over to him, looming over the sofa. "You spent 10 years telling me I was soft. You told your friends I was a boring housewife. You told Vanessa I was furniture. You mistook my loyalty for stupidity, Harrison. You thought because I didn't scream, I wasn't angry. You thought because I didn't spend money, I didn't understand it." She leaned down, her face inches from his. He could smell her perfume. Santal 33, crisp and expensive. I'm a Kensington Harrison. My family has been banking since before the Civil War. We don't scream. We don't make scenes. We compound interest. And you just defaulted. Harrison shrank back into the cushions. He felt small, microscopic. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice barely audible. Well? Charlotte straightened up, smoothing her skirt. That depends on you. The FBI is likely going to execute the warrant within the next 24 hours. My lawyers tell me that if you cooperate, plead guilty, and return the assets you stole, you might get out in 3 to 5 years. Minimum security. Maybe. And if I fight, then I will use the resources of Beauchamp Dynamics and Helios Capital to fund a private prosecution alongside the state. We will bury you in litigation until you are 80 years old. Harrison stared at the floor. The linoleum pattern swirled before his eyes. But, Charlotte said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming almost conversational, I didn't come here just to threaten you. I came to give you a parting gift, something to help you survive the next chapter. Harrison looked up, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Money. A lawyer. Better. She reached into the bag one last time. She pulled out a small silver keyring with a Honda logo and a plastic grocery bag. The keys to the Civic, she said, dropping them on the table. It's parked out front. It has a full tank of gas. You might need it to get to your arraignment. Harrison stared at the keys. And the bag. Charlotte placed the plastic bag on the table. It made a crinkling sound. Yarn, she said. Harrison blinked. What? Yarn? And knitting needles? Merino wool, actually. Very high quality. Is this a joke? Harrison's face turned red. Not at all. Charlotte said, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. You told me in court to go buy some yarn. You said I should stick to my soft hobbies. Well, prison can be very boring, Harrison. I hear knitting is excellent for stress relief. And since you're going to be spending a lot of time in a small confined space with people who might want to hurt you, learning to make something soft might be the only thing that saves your sanity. She checked her watch, a Cartier tank. I have a board meeting at 2. We're discussing the acquisition of a propulsion startup in Seattle. Real technology, not the vaporware you were peddling. She turned and walked toward the door. Charlotte, wait. Harrison scrambled up from the sofa. He stumbled toward her, grabbing her arm. Please, I have nothing. No money, no food. The $50,000. The settlement check. I can't access it. I'm starving, Shah. Charlotte looked down at his hand on her cashmere coat. She didn't pull away violently. She just looked at his hand with such intense distaste that he let go as if he'd been burned. The $50,000 transfer failed because the funds were drawn from a frozen account, she explained. However, I am not a cruel woman. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crisp $20 bill. She tucked it into the breast pocket of his stained t-shirt. There's a bodega on the corner. They make a decent chopped cheese sandwich. It should tide you over until booking. $20. Harrison stared at her, tears of humiliation welling in his eyes. I gave you the world, Charlotte. You gave me anxiety, she corrected, and a mortgage, and a fake life. She opened the door. The hallway air rushed in smelling of boiled cabbage. Goodbye, Harrison. Don't worry about the rent for this place. I paid it up for 6 months. After that, well, you'll be the state's problem. Shah, he pleaded one last time. Who are you? She paused in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the flickering hallway light. She looked back at him, and for a second he saw the woman he had married. The woman who had held his hand when his mother died, the woman who had believed in him when no one else did. But that woman was trapped behind a wall of ice. "I'm the majority shareholder," she said. And then she closed the door. Harrison stood in the silence. Click. The lock engaged. He was alone. He walked slowly back to the coffee table. He looked at the indictment. United States vs. Harrison Beauchamp. He looked at the passport he couldn't use. He looked at the keys to a 10-year-old Honda Civic. And then he looked at the yarn. 2 skeins of soft grey wool. He picked up the $20 bill. It felt crisp, real. It was the only liquid asset he had in the world. His stomach growled a violent, painful protest. Harrison Beauchamp, the man who had once ordered a $3,000 bottle of wine just to pour it down the sink to impress a client, walked into the kitchenette. He put the $20 on the counter. He filled a glass with tap water. He walked to the window and looked down at the street. He saw Charlotte's Bentley pulling away from the curb, a sleek grey shark swimming through the ocean of Queen's traffic. He watched it until it turned the corner and vanished. He sat back down on the sofa. He picked up the knitting needles. He held them awkwardly, the metal cold in his hands. He remembered watching Charlotte knit for hours, the click, click, click sound that used to annoy him while he was trying to watch TV. He had called it a waste of time. He had called it mindless. He tried to loop the yarn around the needle, his hands shaking. He couldn't do it. The wool slipped and tangled. Harrison threw the needles across the room. They clattered against the wall. He curled his knees to his chest and lay down on the lumpy sofa. The water stain on the ceiling seemed to be staring at him. The faucet dripped, drip, drip, drip. Outside in the distance, the wail of a siren began to rise, getting louder, coming closer. Harrison closed his eyes and listened. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He just waited for the inevitable, finally understanding the true cost of the signature he had forced in that courtroom. He had signed away his wife, but in the fine print, he had signed away his life. The siren stopped directly below his window. Harrison started to laugh. It was a dry, broken sound that echoed in the empty apartment. "Checkmate," he whispered to the empty room. The heavy boots of the inevitable pounded on the stairs. And that is the story of how Harrison Beauchamp tried to throw away a queen to keep a pawn, only to realize too late who was truly playing the game. He mistook Charlotte's silence for weakness and her kindness for stupidity, a mistake that cost him his fortune, his freedom, and his name. It's a brutal reminder that sometimes the most powerful people in the room are the ones who haven't said a word yet. What do you think? Did Harrison deserve his fate, or was Charlotte's revenge too harsh? Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of corporate karma, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a dose of drama. Until next time.